We are now proud to introduce the Denny Jaeger Private Collection, Volume 1, a wildly diverse collection of incredibly powerful sounds covering both known and thoroughly alien instruments, from orchestra and rhythm to Denny Jaeger's out-of-control imagination. This collection represents over 4 years of development and sets the stage for a whole new direction in sampling. Let's get into it. The Denny Jaeger Private Collection offers 3 keyboard pads. You're listening to the first one. These pads are looped and patched over the entire range of the keyboard. Unlike most keyboard pads, these pads have virtually invisible loops. The individual sound files making up these banks are constructed from many different sounds that have been individually equalized and blended together to maximize their sound performance in the keyboard range where they are to be used. Here's the second keyboard pad. Here's the third keyboard pad. Unlike most other stabs, these string stabs allow you to play any chord you wish. Each individual stab sample is essentially 3 octaves, but contains no other harmonies. You create the harmonies by playing multiple keys on the keyboard. By this method, string stab chords of enormous size can be created in any key. There are 3 orchestral instrument patches of superior quality in this collection. They include solo English horn, bassoon, and 2 trombones playing in unison. The English horn and bassoon are patched with a new sample every half or whole step. The 2 trombones are patched in minor thirds. Here's a short passage with the English horn playing with the first keyboard pad from this collection. Here's a short passage with the bassoon playing with the second keyboard pad. Here's a short passage with the trombones playing with the third keyboard pad. Denny Jaeger has developed revolutionary techniques that can turn almost anything into a power instrument. For instance, he saw an unthinkable potential in a lampshade, the possibility of an entirely new instrument. Proprietary methods that Denny developed have permitted him to go into a basically unusable sound and reconstruct it. Using these methods, the sound is broken down into a series of different components of the same sound. The components are then reconstructed individually to create entirely new sounds. These are ultimately combined to create a sound you've never heard before. To turn the lampshade into a power instrument, 4 individual sound components were reconstructed from the original. Here's an example of the first lampshade component. Just kidding. Here's the real example now. Here's an example of the second lampshade component. Here's an example of the third lampshade component. Here's an example of the fourth lampshade component. Now here's a patch of all 4 reconstructed lampshade samples blended together. Another unique feature of this collection is the availability of sounds that were previously considered too soft to be recordable. Denny Jaeger perfected revolutionary techniques which enabled him to create a whole new group of sounds never heard before. The trick was to take an extremely soft and dull sound and be able to play it back very loud, making it sound bright but not noisy. For instance, the following sound was created by hitting a 3-inch diameter coconut half shell floating upside down in a bowl of water. The shell is being struck with a rubber mallet. The coconut sound is so soft, even with a hand-built Jensen mic preamp and a custom-modified Neumann microphone, it couldn't be recorded loud enough to be of any practical use. Here's the original, unaltered coconut shell recording. Here it is after the first stage of reconstruction. Here's a final version of the same sound. Here's a brief passage using the coconut shell in a patch. Two years ago, Denny Jaeger envisioned the possibility of extracting low-end sounds from organic instruments that have large amounts of naturally occurring low frequencies. An off-the-wall experiment uncovered sounds with immense low end, enormous power, unusual warmth, yet absolutely no aliasing. By the way, if you're listening on near-field monitors or headphones, you won't hear much of the low end these sounds are designed to enhance. We're talking low here. Here's another example. Not all low-end sounds in this collection are of the extracted variety. For instance, there's the Gaem. It's an instrument that looks like a pottery vase that you'd put flowers in for your grandma. But Denny's technology has turned the Gaem into a power instrument with intense low-end energy. Here's another example. Here's the same sound with 5 dB added at 40 Hz. Here's the same sound with 12 dB cut at 40 Hz. Denny Jaeger has continually broken new ground in the creation of musical sound effects in the Synclavier. No one has ever released any portion of his enormous collection of musical sound effects created for feature films, record albums, and television. Here is only one of the myriad of examples in this collection. Here's an old Synclavier technique that only a few ever knew about. For years, Denny used one of the original versions of the Synclavier software to create certain types of musical sequences in the Synclavier's recorder. He then played these sequences back at varied speeds in a way that blurred the individual notes together to create unique sounds. Here's an example. Now let me introduce the Mega Patch. Don't let the word mega worry you. It doesn't mean you have to buy up all the memory in town to use this thing. There are Mega Patches that use less than 8 megs. There are also Mega Patches that use more. Here's a Mega Patch using 117 separate samples painstakingly designed to work together on a keyboard. This is a 7.9 megabyte patch. Contrary to what you might think, the playing of this Mega Patch is easy. The intricate detail happens automatically as you play on a keyboard, utilizing velocity switching as you would when you play any other patch. And here's a new feature. Instead of pre-recorded rolls, Mega Patch lets you play rolls any way you want with individual samples. I couldn't begin to cover everything in this collection here in this demo, but there is one last category that merits a close look. Denny Jaeger's approach to live drum samples is simply the most realistic and versatile ever achieved. In creating these drum patches, the real problem is that one sample, no matter how great, is just that, one sample. The fact is, a live feeling comes from a constantly changing variety of different drum hits created during a live performance. That's what you've got here. The following example is created entirely from Denny Jaeger drum samples. The ever-changing variety of real drums is captured in Denny Jaeger's sound banks, utilizing from 7 to 26 different samples for each of the drum kit elements. All of these samples are equalized with the finest tube and solid-state EQs available today. All of these drum samples were recorded at Studio D in Sausalito, one of the finest drum rooms on the U.S. West Coast. It has been home to Huey Lewis in the News, Chris Isaak, Faith No More, Soundgarden, Robert Cray, and many, many more. The drums were played in pieces of music, not just played for the purpose of generating samples. And now I'd like to introduce you to Joel Jaffe, engineer, producer, and co-owner of Studio D Recording. Joel?
Hi. I recorded these drums during several live sessions at Studio D Recording in Sausalito. Here's an example Denny played for me, which constantly goes from a live kit I recorded at Studio D to samples from his collection, and I couldn't tell the difference. Now, the snare drum in this library belongs to Bill Gibson from Huey Lewis and the News, and we brought Bill in to listen to this library. Here are his comments.
Drum sampling for me has always been a real cold thing. I'm very tired of the one kick, one snare approach where every hit's the same. With this library, this is the first time that I've had enough samples to really create a live performance that I'm happy with. A sampling library like this has never been produced before, and it's going to change the way people do sampled drums all over the world.
To really appreciate and understand what Denny has created here, you really need to take a closer look at what he's done to each part of the drum kit. For a closer look at this, I'm going to turn you back to the announcer.
Denny Jaeger's approach to drums is to provide an expansive array of personal taste choices through the use of Megapatch. Approximately 100 separate hat samples give you enormous control. For example, the common problem of achieving rhythmic control over open and closed hats is solved by having samples that just close the hat and samples that let the open hats ring long enough not to box you into certain open-close rhythms. So by using these samples, you can easily create open and closed hats in any tempo. There are approximately 100 separate hat taps to choose from varied articulations of quarter note time taps to very light taps that can be used to play offbeat rhythms against the louder taps. All of these hat taps were taken from live performances to maximize the feel of the samples, and they are all in easy-to-play mega patches. Here's a section of hats played in light echo. This collection offers over 50 different loud and soft kick samples, which consist of both mono direct mic and stereo room mic kicks as separate samples. These are patched in mega patches on the keyboard and controlled by velocity or by a mod wheel. These kick mega patches let you control the amount of room sound of each of your kicks, thus controlling the timbre and size of each kick. Here's a short example utilizing some direct mic kicks with varying amounts of added room mic kick samples. The kicks are playing along with various hat samples. The snares are even more flexible. Each snare hit is made up of a combination of 4 separate individual samples. And there are up to 26 of each of these separate snare combinations for a total of 104 separate parts. And it's easy for you to use. Let me explain. The 4 separate samples for each snare hit are 2 different direct mic samples, 1 stereo overhead sample, and 1 stereo room sample. These layered snare samples give you the flexibility of choosing a different timbre quality for each snare hit. There are a variety of ways to do this, including using the velocity and mod wheel. Here's an example of a direct mic snare sample pair. Here's just the one direct mic'd sound. Here's just the other. Now for each direct mic snare sample pair, there are 2 additional stereo samples that can be added to it. An overhead snare sample and a room snare sample. By controlling the volumes of the overhead and the room snare sample, in conjunction with the direct snare samples, you can control the size of the room that the snare is playing in and change the timbre quality of each individual snare hit. Listen. Similar combinations exist for the toms as for the snares. A 3-rack tom set was recorded in stereo to preserve the stereo imaging of the live kit used to create these samples. Up to 7 stereo direct mic samples are available for each of the 3 toms. In addition, there is a stereo overhead sample and a stereo room sample available for each of the individual direct mic samples. In the same way you control the size of the room the snares are playing in, you can control the size of the room that the toms are playing in. Here's a drum kit with a direct tom fill only. Here it is with an overhead tom fill only. Here it is with a room tom fill only. And here's an example with all of the previous tom sounds mixed together. Well, that's it for this demo. It's impossible to cover everything here, but let there be no doubt that Denny Jaeger's unique sound design is present in every single sample available on this new collection, the Denny Jaeger Private Collection Volume 1. For a copy of this demo disc, or for a copy of the Denny Jaeger Private Collection Volume 1, please contact Q Up Arts